Zero latency. For months on the leaderboard. One deadly collision in real life. On the grid, trust is everything. In the boardroom, it's a liability. Chapter 1. The Update. It started as a joke. Or maybe as an act of desperation. Viana Caccione was bored, running on 3 hours of rest, and coming off the back of a week that felt like a 10-round heavyweight boxing match. Malivra Software was closing out its financial year-end, which meant the entire 60-story glass tower had been operating on high alert, caffeine overdoses, and low-grade terror for 14 days straight. By the time the clock on her dual monitors struck 8 o'clock on a Friday evening, the floor had emptied with the quiet resignation of a battlefield after a ceasefire. Tired faces, dragged feet, and the faint smell of stale takeout were all that remained in the open-plan office. Viana leaned back, her spine popping in 3 places, before pushing her chair away from her desk. She gathered her jacket and dropped her badge into her coat pocket. Inside her shoulder bag, her personal phone gave a sharp double buzz. She dug it out and swiped the screen awake. Notification. Elysium, patch 4.12 installed, new terrain, Sector 9 high-rises. Updated ballistics and haptic feedback. Login operative. A tired, genuine smile finally tugged at the corner of Viana's lips. Well, this will officially be the highlight of my weekend, she whispered to herself. Setting her phone to silent, she slung the bag over her shoulder and walked through the dimly lit rows of empty desks. The soft, ambient hum of the server rooms behind the glass partitions hummed like a low bass line through the floorboards. Viana reached the elevator bank and pressed the down button, watching the light glow amber. Then came the sound. Click, clack, click, clack. The sharp, uncompromising crack of designer heels echoing off the polished marble corridor made Viana freeze mid-step. She glanced sideways toward the executive wing, inwardly praying to whatever cosmic force was listening that the elevator doors would open before those shoes reached the lobby interface. Click, clack. The sound stopped abruptly near the corner office suite. Viana didn't wait to see if the occupant was turning around. The elevator chimed, the brushed chrome doors slid open, and Viana practically ducked inside like a soldier entering a bunker. She slammed her thumb against the lobby button, then mashed the door close button 3 times in rapid succession. She closed her eyes, holding her breath until the heavy doors hissed completely shut, cutting off the silence of the top floor. As the elevator began its smooth, stomach-dropping descent, Viana exhaled visibly, leaning her head back against the mirrored wall. Relief washed over her, mixed with sheer exhaustion. She knew the owner of those heels. Everyone in the building did. Soleil Makiras, CEO, founder. The woman who looked like she'd been carved out of winter marble and dressed by Milan's cold-hearted elite. To the tech world, Soleil was a visionary prodigy who had built Malivra into a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut before turning 35. To her employees, she was a terrifyingly efficient force of nature who moved through the building in a cloud of bespoke tailoring, expensive Louboutin heels, and an atmosphere so frigid it could preserve produce. Standing in the same room as Soleil Makiras meant double-checking every line of code you'd written in the last 6 months, standing a little straighter, and praying she didn't ask you a direct question about Q3 margins. Viana was a brilliant senior software engineer. She knew her worth, and she knew her code was flawless. But tonight, she didn't have the emotional bandwidth to absorb the CEO's icy gaze. Viana crossed the sleek, cavernous main lobby, nodding vaguely at the overnight security guard, and stepped out into the crisp evening air. 45 minutes later, Viana was home. She kicked off her flats, tossed her bag onto the counter, and shed her work clothes like a snake casting off dead skin. She threw on an oversized gray hoodie, pulled her hair back into a messy knot, and poured herself a massive glass of water before heading straight into her second room, the studio. In the corner sat her pride and joy, an ergonomic zero-gravity rig fitted with the latest full-body haptic suit and the custom-built Neuralink VR visor. In the real world, Viana was part of the engineering team that helped keep Malivera's back-end infrastructure indestructible. But inside Elysium, she was someone else entirely. To the public, Elysium was the world's premier high-stakes military VR simulator, a brutally realistic digital landscape of crumbling cities, tactical ops, precise ballistics, and raw survival. To Viana, it was home. More than that, she had secretly co-developed core elements of its environmental logic under an ironclad anonymous contract. In the game, she was Ione, the last 4 letters of her surname, and a legendary, highly feared elite assault operative belonging to the Vanguard faction. Viana zipped into the sleek, black compression haptic suit, feeling the micro-actuators snug against her skin, shoulders, and ribs. She settled into the zero-gravity chair, pulled the lightweight visor over her eyes, and reached for the neural connection sequence. Identify, a smooth synthesized voice chimed in her ears. User, Ione, Viana spoke into the mic, authentication code, 97 Delta 0. Retinal scan complete. Neural link established. Welcome back, operative. The darkness exploded into a cascade of electric blue code before resolving into sharp, hyper-realistic daylight. The sensory transition was instant and overwhelming. The smells came first: wet asphalt, burnt cordite, rain-soaked concrete, and ozone. Then the sounds, the distant rumble of thunder, the low hum of wind whistling through shattered glass, and the crunch of gravel under her combat boots. Viana took a deep breath, flexing her gloved hands in the simulation. The haptic suit fired minute electrical impulses into her muscles, perfectly mimicking the weight of her tactical armor and the cold, textured grip of the assault rifle slung across her chest. She popped open her interface window to review the patch notes. Sector 9. An urban warzone map modeled after a dense, ruined metropolis of rain-slicked skyscrapers, narrow alleys, and shattered skybridges. It was built for verticality, close-quarters combat, and snipers. Viana's pulse gave a sudden, familiar flutter. Whenever she thought of snipers in Elysium, she thought of only one person: Gaia. The name alone was enough to make Viana's teeth grind in a mix of profound respect and pure, unadulterated frustration. Nobody knew who Gaia was. The player was a ghost. A legend. A rogue sniper who played the opposing faction and possessed an almost unnatural, sickening level of precision. For 4 months, Ione and Gaia had been locked in an unwritten, fiercely petty war across the game's leaderboard. If Ione took an objective, Gaia was 3 miles away on a rooftop, putting a high-caliber round through Ione's ballistic helmet half a second before she could celebrate. If Gaia was setting up a nest, Ione would spend 45 minutes crawling through mud and ruined sewage pipes just to flank her position and drop a flashbang right at her feet. They had never spoken a word outside of short, brutal in-game taunts over encrypted comms channels. They had never met. But Gaia was the only player in the entire multi-million user network who could make Viana's blood boil and her adrenaline surge in equal measure. Gaia, a Greek name meaning earth. A joke, probably, for someone who spent all her time aiming down from the heavens like a god judging mortals. Viana cracked her knuckles in the rig, adjusting her rifle's optic scope as she stepped out of the spawn point onto a high, rain-drenched catwalk overlooking Sector 9. "All right, sniper," Viana muttered, a dark, competitive grin spreading across her face as the rain simulated tiny, cold impacts against her tactical visor. "Let's see if you updated your software, or if I finally get to kick your teeth in tonight." She unclipped her radio, switched to the global tactical ping frequency, and broadcasted a single, pinging coordinate right to the top of the tallest building in the sector. It was an open invitation. A taunt. 3 seconds later, a tiny red light blinked on her HUD. A private encrypted response pinged back from the opposite side of the grid. GIA, you're late, Ione. I was starting to think you got stuck doing overtime. Viana barked out a short, incredulous laugh, her heart instantly kicking into high gear. Oh, you smug little menace, she muttered, sliding into cover behind a reinforced concrete pillar as the wind howled through the digital canyon. You have no idea. Chapter 2: Tactical Coldness. The penthouse was silent except for the faint, steady hum of the City 80 stories below and the gentle clinking of ice against crystal glass. Soleil Maqueras poured 2 fingers of single malt scotch, threw back a swallow, and let the liquid burn a path down her throat. She set the glass onto the polished obsidian kitchen island and unbuttoned her silk blazer, tossing it carelessly over the back of a leather armchair. Her feet were aching. She kicked off her black patent Louboutins with a soft thud against the hardwood floor, standing motionless in the dim, ambient light of her apartment. To the world, she was the impenetrable face of Malivera Software. She was the executive who fired board members before breakfast, signed 8-figure acquisition deals by lunch, and maintained an aura so sharp it could cut glass. Her board of directors thought she slept 4 hours a night and spent the rest of her time studying global market futures. They didn't know a damn thing. Soleil walked into her private study, sliding open a heavy oak door that revealed a setup that would make any professional esports athlete weep. 2 ultra-wide high-refresh monitors sat flanked by a custom water-cooled rig with glowing matte silver tubing. Hanging on a custom stand beside the zero-gravity flight chair was her personal neural haptic suit, custom-fitted, military-grade, and engineered with response times that standard consumers couldn't buy for any amount of money. Soleil stripped down out of her tailored suit pants and pulled on the sleek, form-fitting compression suit. She zipped it up to her throat, pulled her dark hair back into a tight braid, and slid the sleek, lightweight VR visor down over her eyes. "Identify," she said, her voice dropping into the cool, command tone she used in boardroom standoffs. "User, Gaia," the system replied instantly. Neural pathway synchronized. "Welcome back, operative. Sensory engagement, 100%. In an instant, the high-rise penthouse melted away. Soleil opened her eyes inside a decaying, rain-slicked concrete bunker overlooking Sector 9. The smell of wet soot and warm copper hit her senses with vivid, sharp reality. The haptic suit tightened around her torso, simulating the heavy, weighted burden of a custom bolt-action anti-material sniper rifle strapped to her back. She rolled her shoulders, feeling the simulated weight, and stepped toward the ledge of the shattered concrete wall. Elysium was her sanctuary. Here, there were no board members, no SEC filings, no delicate corporate diplomacy. Here, problems were simple: acquire target, calculate wind resistance, adjust for elevation, squeeze trigger. Total control. Absolute precision. Soleil pulled her rifle from her back, checking the chamber with a fluid, practiced flick of her wrist. Then, a ping vibrated against the back of her wrist interface. A high-priority tactical broadcast ping dropped straight onto her HUD, lighting up the top of a ruined radio tower 2 kilometers across the grid. A competitive, dark smile touched Soleil's lips in the darkness of her visor. "Ione." Soleil unclipped her comms link, adjusting her scope's magnification dial as she brought the far tower into crystal focus. Through the digital rain, she caught the subtle movement of a dark, fast-moving tactical silhouette sliding into cover behind a concrete pillar. Aggressive. Reckless. Unbelievably fast. Ione had been a thorn in Soleil's side for months. Whoever was controlling that avatar had instincts that were borderline miraculous. She moved like a phantom, hit like a sledgehammer, and possessed a ruthless, sarcastic stubbornness that infuriated Soleil to no end and kept her coming back every single night. Soleil keyed her encrypted comms line, letting her voice filter into the low, calm register she reserved exclusively for her digital alias. "GIA, you're late, Ione. I was starting to think you got stuck doing overtime. Through her high-powered optic scope, Soleil saw Ione's avatar pause for a fraction of a second. Ione, some of us actually have lives to live outside of sitting on a roof in the rain, sniper. But don't worry, I made time in my schedule to clear your spot on the leaderboard. Soleil chuckled, a low, smooth sound that vibrated slightly in her throat. She shifted her stance, anchoring her rifle against a broken concrete sandbag. GA, bold words for someone currently standing in my primary kill zone. Ione, then take the shot, Gaia. Or are your hands shaking tonight? Not a chance, Soleil whispered under her breath in her dark study. She tracked Ione's avatar as it burst out from behind the pillar in a zigzag dash toward a zipline connecting to the central high-rise. Ione was moving at full speed, using low-profile slides and thermal smoke canisters to break line of sight. It was a brilliant maneuver. Precise, calculated, and executed with zero hesitation. Soleil's eye narrowed behind her scope. She tracked the arc of the zipline, adjusted 3 clicks to the left for the gale force simulated wind, calculated the drop velocity, and exhaled slowly. Between one heartbeat and the next, Soleil pulled the trigger. Thumb crack. The heavy anti-material rifle kicked brutally against her shoulder via the haptic suit. A high-caliber tracer round streaked through the rain, ripping through the digital sky and shattering the zipline cable half a second before Ione could latch onto it. Ione dropped 6 feet into a lower concrete balcony, rolling smoothly to absorb the impact, completely cutting off her vertical advantage. GIA, access denied. Try again, operative. A sharp, breathless laugh echoed over the comms channel from Ione. It was full of frustration, fiery grit, and pure adrenaline. Ione, you think that stops me? You just ruined my favorite coat, you arrogant pest. I'm coming up there. GIA, I'll leave the door unlocked. Soleil slung the rifle back onto her harness, unholstered 2 sidearms, and dropped into a low combat crouch as heavy boots began thundering up the stairwell below her position. Her heart was pounding against her ribs, a fast, intoxicating rhythm she never felt in boardrooms out in the real world. People cowered when Soleil Makiras entered a room. They agreed with her, bowed to her, and tiptoed around her ice. But here, Ione fought her tooth and nail, meeting her power with pure, unfiltered fire. And Soleil loved every single second of it. Chapter 3. The Crunch and the Kill Shot. Monday morning arrived at Malivera Software with all the grace of a flashbang going off in a small room. Viana stood near the espresso machine on the 14th floor, watching the dark liquid drip agonizingly slowly into her mug. Her eyes burned, her lower back ached from her VR rig session the night before, and her brain was split directly down the middle. Half of it was focused on the critical memory leak in Malivera's core backend server. The other half was trapped in Sector 9, replaying the moment Gaia had dropped a flash grenade through an elevator shaft to deny her a clean knife kill. Arrogant, insufferable sniper, Viana thought, taking a burning sip of black coffee. She got lucky. Next time, I'm tearing her optic scope right off her rifle. Viana. Code red in the executive conference room. Her team lead, Marcus, gasped as he rounded the corner, looking pale enough to pass for a ghost. The main deployment branch just failed validation. CEO wants the entire lead engineering squad upstairs. Now. Viana didn't even have time to sigh. She grabbed her tablet, left her coffee, and followed Marcus into the elevator. The 60th floor, the executive suite, was silent in the way a storm front is silent right before a tornado touches down. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline, but inside, the air was pressurized, freezing, and thick with terror. When Soleil looked at the screen, then down at Viana. For a microsecond, something warm and genuinely impressed flickered behind the CEO's eyes, before it was instantly locked back behind her corporate armor. Acceptable work, Miss Cacchiona, Soleil said softly. You saved your team a very uncomfortable afternoon. Just doing my job, Miss Makiras, Viana replied dryly, standing up and grabbing her tablet. Some of us prefer solving problems over panicking about them. Soleil's lips twitched almost into a smile. A rare trait on this floor. Dismissed. 12 hours later, Viana was back in her gray hoodie, locked into her zero-gravity rig, stepping onto the neon-drenched, rain-slicked sky bridge of Sector 9 in Elysium. The haptic suit zipped to life, the rain hummed against her visor, and Viana flexed her fingers around the grip of her heavy assault rifle. She had built up so much workplace frustration over the course of the day that she was practically buzzing with violent energy. "All right, sniper," Viana growled into her comms channel. "I've had a day from hell. Show your face." A low, familiar, infuriatingly smooth laugh echoed in her earpiece. "GA, rough day at the office, little operative? Did your boss yell at you? Ione, you have no idea. Now stand still so I can shoot you in the visor. GIA, come and make me." The game was on. Gaia opened fire from a crane 400 meters out. Heavy anti-material rounds tore up the concrete around Viana's boots, sending haptic shockwaves rattling through her legs and hips. Instead of taking cover like a normal player, Viana went completely feral. She activated her mobility thrusters, dropping into a high-speed slide beneath a barrage of sniper fire. She tossed 2 smoke grenades directly onto the bridge to block Gaia's thermal optics, then launched a grapple hook onto the undercarriage of the crane. "What are you doing?" Gaia's voice pinged over the comms, a rare trace of genuine surprise in her cool tone. "That's a 50-meter drop." "I told you," Viana yelled over the roar of wind and simulated gunfire, reeling herself up the side of the metal structure with terrifying speed. "I'm not in the mood for tactics tonight." Viana vaulted over the edge of the crane platform, coming up right in front of Gaia's prone position. Gaia scrambled back, unholstering her sidearm with lightning-fast instincts, but Viana was already on her. Viana lunged forward, tackling the sniper across the metallic gantry. The haptic collision hit both women hard, a rush of simulated physical weight, chest-to-chest impact, and rapid breathing locked together in the dark, rainy sky. Viana pinned Gaia's wrist to the deck, her physical avatar hovering directly over the elite sniper. Gaia's visor was inches from her own, dark blue tactical light reflecting off the rain on their armor. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. The tactile feedback in Viana's suit registered the heavy, rhythmic rise and fall of Gaia's chest beneath her hands. Even in a digital simulator, the sheer physical intensity of the position made Viana's breath hitch in her throat. "Ione, gotcha," Viana whispered into the mic, her voice dropping into a breathless, teasing purr. Gaia didn't panic. Through the visor, Soleil, sitting in her dark penthouse study half a city away, her heart hammering against her ribs, smiled a dangerous, slow smile. "GIA, did you?" Before Viana could press the trigger on her sidearm, Gaia reached up with her free hand, grabbed the emergency override pin on Viana's chest rig, and pulled it. Boom! A localized flash charge exploded between their chest plates, blasting both players backward. Viana went flying off the edge of the crane, tumbling into the dark sky toward the ground below as her health bar hit 0. "System, you have been killed by Gaia." Viana collapsed back into her zero-gravity chair in the real world, ripping off her visor, breathless, flushed, and staring wide-eyed at her ceiling. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. "She pulled my pin." Viana gasped, letting out a wild, half-crazed laugh as she wiped sweat from her forehead. "That absolute brilliant, arrogant bitch." Across town in her high-rise penthouse, Soleil Makiras pulled off her own visor. She leaned back against her leather seat, her chest heaving, a dark, thrilled blush rising on her cheeks. She stared at the victory screen on her monitor. Ione. No one had ever pushed her like that. No one had ever dared get that close. Soleil traced her thumb over her bottom lip, her mind racing with a lethal combination of adrenaline and sudden, burning curiosity. "Who the hell are you?" Soleil whispered to the empty room. Chapter 4: Mutual Animosity. By Tuesday morning, the air on the 14th floor was thick with rumors. Word had spread like wildfire through the engineering department that Viana Caccione had spent 15 minutes sitting in Soleil Macheraz's chair, rewriting core concurrency code, while the CEO stood over her like a shadow. To most people in the building, that sounded like a terrifying ordeal akin to surviving a close encounter with the apex predator. To Viana, it was just another reason her shoulders were knotted tighter than a line of bad code. "You're a legend," Caccione, Marcus muttered, dropping a folder onto Viana's desk. "Or a ghost walking. I can't decide which." "I fixed a thread allocation bug, Marcus. I didn't wrestle a bear," Viana said, without looking up from her terminal. "Same thing on the 60th floor," he replied, lowering his voice. "Anyway, brace yourself. Executive assistant dropped that off 5 minutes ago. You've been reassigned." Viana stopped typing. She picked up the thick leather-bound folder. "Memorandum. Special project, Project Aegis. Lead architecture lead, Viana Caccione. Direct executive oversight, Soleil Macheras, CEO." Viana felt the air leave her lungs in a long, slow sigh. Direct executive oversight. That meant daily check-ins. That meant status updates in the corner office. That meant spending hours inside the frigid orbit of the woman who made liquid nitrogen look warm. "Unbelievable," Viana muttered, leaning her forehead against her desk. The Ice Queen couldn't handle 10 seconds in a real, chaotic situation, and now she wants to micromanage my every move. On the 60th floor, Soleil Macheras stood in front of her floor-to-ceiling glass windows, holding a porcelain teacup. She looked at the organizational chart displayed on her tablet. Viana Caccione's profile picture stared back, professional, slight smirk, intelligent brown eyes. Soleil remembered the way Viana Caccione had handled the pressure yesterday. No stuttering, no trembling hands, no desperate glances toward her superiors. Just cold, quiet competence and a razor-sharp tongue. Viana Caccione had spoken to her with a dry, casual confidence that usually got people fired or, in this case, promoted to Soleil's personal watch list. "She's insubordinate, overly relaxed, and brilliant," Soleil thought, taking a slow sip of hot tea. "Let's see if she holds up under real weight." That night, Viana didn't log into a lithium right away. She sat on her couch with a bowl of instant noodles, staring at the Project Aegis documentation until her eyes watered. By midnight, her brain was thoroughly fried, her frustration was boiling over, and she needed an outlet before she lost her mind. She pulled on her haptic suit, lowered her VR visor, and initiated the neural link. "User, Ione," she barked. "Get me into Sector 9. Sensory engagement, 100%. The sensory shift slammed into her senses like a cold wave, the smell of ozone, the heavy crunch of gravel under her combat boots, the driving rain hammering against her ballistic helmet. Before Viana could even load her loadout menu, a massive system prompt flashed bright amber across her HUD, flashing with red warning borders. World event: The Siege of Sector 9. Objective: defend the primary server array in Sector 9. Requirement: Duo Squad, mandatory co-op. Reward: classified legendary EXA loadout and 50,000 faction credits. Matchmaking: automatic pairing based on nearest rival MMR rating. Viana's stomach dropped. Nearest rival MMR? A sharp chime sounded in her ears. A second avatar materialized out of the rain 15 feet away, stepping smoothly out of the digital fog. Matte black armor. Heavy anti-material bolt rifles slung across her back. A cold, glowing blue optic visor that tracked directly to Viana's face. Gaia. System, squad formed, Ione, and Gaia. Compliance required for event entry. Viana stared. You have got to be kidding me. GIA, a duo event? With you? Gaia's smooth, composed voice echoed directly into Viana's private squad channel, laced with a mix of genuine annoyance and dark amusement. GIA, the game developers clearly have a sense of humor. Ione, I'm leaving the lobby, Viana said instantly, tapping her interface. I'd rather swallow a flashbang than carry you through a siege mission. GIA, check the reward pool, operative. Viana paused, her hand hovering over the abandon match button. She expanded the rewards tab. The classified legendary exoloadout included an experimental optics suite, a piece of gear she'd been tracking for 3 months. GA, you want that scope just as badly as I want the reinforced armor plating. Unless, of course, you're admitting you can't work as part of a team? Viana's teeth ground together. Arrogant, manipulative pest. Ione, I work fine in a team. I just don't like dead weight. GIA dead weight? A low, rich chuckle filtered through the comms. Remind me who won our last interaction on the crane? Ione, you blew yourself up to kill me. That's not winning, that's a temper tantrum. GIA, it was effective. And you're still complaining about it 24 hours later. Viana let out a harsh, frustrated breath that fogged her visor inside the haptic rig. All right. Fine. One mission. We get the loadout, we split the credits, and then I go back to shooting you in the face. GIA agreed. Try to keep up, Ione. I don't like dragging people behind me. The system countdown hit 0, and the massive reinforced steel doors of the Sector 9 server bunker hissed open, revealing a horde of heavily armored AI combat drones advancing through the rain-slicked courtyard. I'll take the high ground on the catwalk, Gaia commanded smoothly, unslinging her sniper rifle with practiced, fluid grace. I'll cover the heavy units. You choke the bottleneck at the main gate. Don't give me orders, sniper, Viana snapped, racking the bolt on her heavy assault rifle and dropping into a combat stance. Just don't miss. GIA, I never miss. Viana sprinted forward, diving over a sandbag barricade just as the enemy vanguard opened fire. Tracers lit up the dark, rainy night. The haptic suit hummed and buzzed against Viana's ribs as she laid down suppressive fire, tearing through the first wave of drones with lethal, aggressive efficiency. Above her, the heavy, rhythmic THUMMM crack of Gaia's anti-material rifle echoed across the courtyard every 2 seconds. Every single shot was a headshot. Every single round dropped a heavy unit before it could breach Viana's perimeter. It was infuriating. It was terrifying. And, as much as Viana hated to admit it, it was absolute poetry. Working together, their dynamic was terrifyingly seamless. Gaia provided the cold, mathematical precision from above, clearing lanes and calling out flankers, while Viana provided the fiery, unstoppable force on the ground, pushing through the fire with raw adrenaline. 3 hostiles coming up on your left flank behind the concrete pillar. Gaia's voice chimed calmly over the comms, as if she were reading a grocery list. Already on it, Viana growled, tossing a grenade around the corner without looking. Boom. GIA, show off. Ione, you love it. The words left Viana's mouth before she could filter them. Silence hung over the squad channel for 2 seconds, punctuated only by the sound of rainfall and dying machinery. In her high-rise penthouse, Soleil Makiras froze with her finger on the trigger, a sudden, unfamiliar heat flushing across her neck. GA, focus on the mission. Operative, Soleil said, her voice dropping an octave lower, laced with a velvet edge that sent a strange, unexpected shiver straight down Viana's spine in her zero-gravity chair. Viana blinked inside her visor, her heart taking a sudden, violent thud against her ribs. What the hell was that? Viana thought, reloading her magazine with shaking fingers. She's an annoying gamer online. Why did that sound hot? Bunker clear, Viana called out quickly, clearing her throat to hide the sudden flutter in her chest. Primary array secure. System, mission complete. Rewards distributed. The victory screen lit up their visors in gold light. Side by side, their avatars stood in the rain, heavy armor gleaming, weapon muzzles smoking. Gaia unslung her rifle and turned toward Viana. For a moment, neither of them moved. The sensory feedback of the game registered the quiet wind, the heat coming off their suits, and the proximity between them. GIA, not bad, Ione. You're almost as useful as you're loud. Ione, and you're almost tolerable when you're busy shooting things. Gaia stepped closer, just 2 inches away. Through the dark visor, Viana could feel the presence of the other player, intense and magnetic. GIA, same time tomorrow? Viana swallowed hard, her pulse racing for reasons that had nothing to do with combat. Ione, only if I get to lead the breach. Gaia let out a soft, low chuckle that vibrated through the audio link. We'll see about that, operative. With a flash of digital blue light, Gaia logged off, leaving Viana standing alone in the rain-slicked courtyard. Viana pulled off her visor in her dark apartment, her face burning, her hair sticking to her forehead. She sat there in the quiet room, staring at the floor. I need a vacation, Viana whispered to herself, covering her face with her hands. I'm catching feelings for a pixel sniper. Chapter 5. The Unwilling Alliance. The high-stakes stealth module of Elysium was known among players as the Meat Grinder. It was set inside Sector 4, a labyrinthine, subterranean network of flooded sewer tunnels, rusted pipe bridges, and pitch-black maintenance corridors beneath the ruined city. There were no radar overlays, no thermal minimaps, and ambient light was practically zero. Environmental damage was doubled, and audio propagation was hyper-detailed. A single footstep splashing in 3 inches of stagnant water could alert an entire squad of heavy AI sentries. In short, it required absolute silence, absolute trust, and flawless coordination. Side by side in the damp, dark tunnel, Ione and Gaia crouched behind a rusted iron bulkhead. The sensory feedback from Viana's haptic suit was almost suffocating, the cold, clammy humidity clinging to her skin, the heavy sloshing of water, and the quiet, rhythmic sound of Gaia's breathing right beside her in the darkness. GIA, 2 sentries on the upper catwalk. Heavy armor, thermal optics. If they raise the alarm, the blast doors lock and we fail the stealth parameter. Ione, I'll take the left one with a silent takedown. You take the right with your suppressed pistol. On 3. GIA, wait. Gaia's gloved hand reached out in the darkness, her tactical fingers catching the sleeve of Viana's compression suit. The touch was light, but through the micro-actuators of the haptic rig, it felt surprisingly warm, a firm, grounding presence that made Viana's breath hitch. GIA, the right sentry's patrol path has a 2-second delay on the turn. Watch his footwork. Don't rush. Viana glanced sideways in the dim, green-tinted night vision view. Gaia's profile was sharp, composed, her posture relaxed despite the intense tension of the environment. Ione, I don't rush, sniper. I execute. GIA, then execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1. They moved like a single, lethal organism. Viana vaulted over the bulkhead without making a sound, sliding through the shadows like a ghost. She brought her combat blade up, neutralizing the left sentry before the AI could even register her movement, while a muffled thwip-thwip from Gaia's suppressed sidearm took the second sentry out mid-turn. Both bodies hit the metal grate simultaneously. 0 alarms. Perfect execution. Viana let out a slow breath, wiping simulated sweat from her brow. Ione, see? Told you. Perfect. GIA, your footstep on the 3rd stride was slightly heavy. You splashed. Ione, are you seriously critiquing my footwork right now? We just cleared the sector. GIA, precision is the difference between surviving and respawning, operative. I expect high standards. Ione, you must be an absolute nightmare at parties. A soft, Genuine laugh echoed in Viana's headset, low, rich, and surprisingly intimate in the quiet darkness of the tunnel. I don't go to parties. Too many people trying to talk about things they don't understand. Viana paused, leaning back against the cold pipe wall as they waited for the next security gate cycle. Ione, fair enough. I usually avoid them by. For a long moment, Soleil didn't speak. She just watched the code, her sharp eyes scanning the lines with unbelievable speed. You're refactoring the memory management layer manually, Soleil observed softly. Her voice wasn't critical, it was fascinated. It's cleaner this way, Viana replied, adjusting her glasses. Fewer abstractions, lower latency. It's tactical. Soleil's head snapped down to look at Viana. Tactical. The exact word Gaia used to describe efficiency. Tactical, Soleil repeated slowly, testing the word on her tongue. Yes, Viana said, glancing up. Up close, without the intimidating barrier of the boardroom table, Soleil looked human. Still impossibly beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and piercing gray eyes, but there was a subtle softness in her posture that Viana had never seen before. If you don't secure the base logic, the whole structure collapses under pressure. Soleil looked at Viana for 3 long seconds. The quiet between them felt surprisingly heavy, filled with the hum of the air conditioning and the distant glow of the city lights behind them. Soleil set her thermal flask on the edge of Viana's desk. Chamomile and mint, Soleil said quietly. It's warm. You look like you're about to fall asleep on your spacebar. Viana blinked, staring at the flask, then back up at the CEO in absolute shock. Miss Makiras, thank you. But you don't have to. It's an executive order, Miss Cacchione, Soleil interrupted, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk playing at the corner of her lips. Drink the tea, push your commit, and go home. I need your brain fully functional tomorrow. Soleil turned and walked back toward the private executive elevator. Viana sat frozen in her chair, watching the elevator doors close behind the CEO. She looked down at the sleek silver flask sitting on her desk, feeling the faint warmth radiating from the metal. She reached out, picked up the flask, and took a small sip. Ice Queen, huh? Viana whispered to the empty room, her heart giving a sudden, confusing little thump in her chest. Okay, maybe she's not totally frozen. Chapter 6, Glitches and Ground Rules. Tuesday afternoon in the 60th floor glass conference room was an exercise in high-tension diplomacy. Soleil sat at the head of the dark oak table, her tablet propped open, reviewing the updated architecture specs for Project Aegis. Across from her, Viana sat with a steaming mug of black coffee, looking much more rested than she had at 1 a.m, her posture sharp and alert. The refactored serialization logic passed all unit tests overnight, Viana said, tapping her screen to broadcast the diagnostic metrics to the main display. Latency is down 32%, and thread synchronization is rock solid. Soleil stared at the charts on the wall, her expression unreadable. She leaned back, tapping her silver pen against her cheek in a steady, rhythmic rhythm. It's fast, Miss Cacchione, Soleil said, her voice smooth and analytical. But your memory deallocation routine in Section 4 is aggressive. You're stripping buffer caches before the secondary handshake's complete. If a packet drops on a bad connection, the thread hangs. Viana didn't flinch. She leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table, meeting Soleil's intense gray eyes directly. The secondary handshakes are redundant, Viana countered smoothly, a faint, confident smirk touching her lips. If a packet drops, the system doesn't need to wait for a handshake, it needs to cut the dead weight and re-engage instantly. Waiting around for a confirmation loop in a high-throughput environment just leaves you exposed. Soleil's pen stopped mid-tap. Cut the dead weight and re-engage instantly. The exact phrase Ione had used 3 nights ago during a high-stakes firefight in Sector 9 when explaining why she ran heavy armor instead of defensive shields. Soleil stared at Viana. The room went deathly quiet. For 3 seconds, Soleil's mind raced through a series of wild, statistically impossible calculations. The sharp, sarcastic confidence. The refusal to yield under pressure. The hyperspecific, aggressive tactical logic applied directly to abstract software engineering. No, Soleil thought, forcing her posture to stay perfectly still as a cold thrill ran down her spine. It's absurd. Viana Caccione is a senior software engineer at my company. She's not an elite tactical operative in an anonymous VR military simulator. Right? An aggressive strategy, Soleil said quietly, her eyes narrowing just a fraction as she probed further. Assuming you don't miss the re-engagement window. Viana shrugged, taking a slow sip of her coffee. I don't miss, Miss Makiras. Soleil's heart gave a sudden, unexpected thud against her ribs. She swallowed hard, locking her corporate mask back into place before her composure could slip. Keep the logic as it is for now, Soleil said, standing up and smoothing her blazer. We'll test it under heavy load tomorrow. Good work, Miss Caccione. Thank you, Miss Makiras, Viana replied, gathering her tablet. As she walked out of the conference room, she muttered under her breath just loudly enough for the door's acoustic sensors to register, told you it was clean. Soleil stood alone in the empty room, watching Viana's receding silhouette through the tinted glass, her pulse racing for reasons that had nothing to do with corporate margins. That night, the atmosphere in Elysium was thick with electric tension. A massive thunderstorm had rolled across Sector 9, drowning the neon-lit concrete ruins in torrents of rain and howling wind. Ione and Gaia were crouched beneath the hollow shell of a rusted billboard on a high-rise rooftop, taking cover while their shields recharged after surviving a brutal 3-squad ambush. The haptic suits were humming, transferring the cold ambient temperature of the simulated rain directly to their skin. GIA, we need to establish ground rules. Viana turned her visor toward the sniper. Gaia was sitting back against a steel beam, holding her heavy anti-material rifle across her lap, her matte black armor slick with digital water. Ione, ground rules? What are you talking about? We just wiped 9 players in 4 minutes. GIA, our dynamic is becoming unpredictable, Gaia said, her voice low, smooth, and laced with that infuriatingly composed tone that made Viana's pulse jump. We're getting distracted. Ione, I'm not distracted, Viana lied through her teeth, remembering how her heart had slammed against her chest earlier that day when her boss had looked at her across the boardroom table. I'm focused on winning. GIA, are you? Gaia leaned in closer. In the dark, rain-soaked shadows of the rooftop, the proximity between their avatars felt suffocatingly real. The microactuators in Viana's haptic vest registered the faint, steady warmth radiating from Gaia's armor. GIA Rule 1. No personal questions. No real-world identities, no locations, no occupations. Ione, fine by me. I don't need to know if you're a 40-year-old accountant in real life. GIA, I'm not an accountant, Gaia replied, a subtle, dark humor lacing her voice. Rule 2. Total tactical cohesion. When we step onto the grid, we move as one unit. Ione, and Rule 3? Gaia reached out, her gloved hand resting lightly over Viana's tactical shoulder plate. The tactile feedback in Viana's suit vibrated straight down her arm, sending a sudden, hot shiver through her entire body. GA Rule 3. Stop flirting with me on open comms, it messes with my wind resistance calculations. Viana let out a sharp, incredulous gasp, her face burning hot under her visor inside her dark apartment. Ione, I am not flirting with you. You arrogant, self-absorbed. GA, you laughed at my joke in the sewer tunnel, operative. That's practically a confession. Ione, I was delirious from thermal exhaustion. Gaia let out a low, rich chuckle, a sound so smooth and magnetic that Viana felt it all the way in her toes. GA, whatever you say, Ione. Hostiles incoming at 2 o'clock. Cover my right flank. Ione, I'm going to accidentally shoot you in the back of the helmet one of these days, Gaia. Gia, you wouldn't dare. You'd miss me too much. Gaia vaulted over the roof ledge into the storm below, leaving Viana sitting in the dark rain, her hands shaking on her rifle, her heart pounding like a drum. Viana pulled back her charging handle with a fierce, frustrated snap. I hate her, Viana growled into her empty room, a huge, helpless grin spreading across her face. Completely hate how much I like her. Chapter 7. Thermal Imaging. Sector 9 was wrapped in pitch darkness. A localized blackout event had hit the map, cutting off all streetlights, building illumination, and ambient UI lighting. The only way to navigate the crumbling concrete skyline was through high-powered thermal imaging lenses. In the neon-green spectrum of Viana's HUD, the world was reduced to heat signatures, shadows, and the cold geometry of broken glass. Side by side in the bell tower of a ruined Gothic cathedral, Ione and Gaia were perched on a narrow stone ledge 300 feet above the streets. The space was barely wide enough for two people. To stay balanced, Gaia's armored back was pressed firmly against Viana's chest, creating a constant, intense stream of thermal feedback through their haptic suits. Viana could feel every single breath Gaia took. The micro-actuators in her vest translated the steady rise and fall of the sniper's ribcage against her sternum. GIA, target squad moving through the plaza below. 3 heat signatures. 1 heavy, 2 recon. Gaia's voice came through the comms link in a low, quiet murmur, so close to Viana's ear that it made her skin prickle beneath her gear. Ione, I've got the heavy painted, Viana whispered, adjusting her grip on her submachine gun. Her cheek was resting almost directly against Gaia's shoulder armor. Give me the word. GIA, hold. Gaia leaned back just a fraction of an inch, shifting her weight. The sudden movement brought the curve of her neck directly against Viana's visor. GIA, your pulse is running high, operative. Are you nervous? Viana's breath hitched in her throat inside her dark apartment. She gripped her controller tighter, trying desperately to calm the sudden, violent thudding in her chest. Ione, it's cramped up here, sniper. You're taking up all the air. GIA, is that what it is? Through the thermal optics, Gaia turned her head slightly. In the high-contrast heat vision, Gaia's avatar glowed in warm shades of orange and red against the cold blue of the stone tower. GA, you move with such absolute conviction on the ground, Ione. But whenever I get close, you freeze. Ione, I don't freeze, Viana growled, her voice dropping into a husky, competitive purr. I'm waiting for the right moment to strike. GIA, then strike. For 2 breathless seconds, neither of them looked at the plaza below. The tactical mission, the high-stakes leaderboard, the blacked-out city, it all faded into background noise behind the crackling, electric tension humming between their avatars. Thumb. Down in the plaza, an enemy flare suddenly popped, bathing the bell tower in blinding white light and cutting off their thermal lenses instantly. Ione, contact. Viana snapped, instantly snapping back into tactical mode. She leaned over Gaia's shoulder, opening fire down into the plaza with ruthless, precise bursts. Gaia didn't hesitate. She swung her rifle into position, using Viana's shoulder as a steady resting brace to fire 3 rapid kill shots into the dark below. They moved together like a synchronized weapon, flawless, lethal, and breathing as one. When the last enemy avatar dissolved into blue digital pixels, silence returned to the tower. Gaia slowly unslung her rifle, sliding her back off Viana's chest. The sudden loss of warmth through the haptic suit left Viana feeling strangely cold. GIA, good shooting, partner. Ione, yeah. You too. The following morning, the atmosphere on the 14th floor of Malivera Software was surprisingly light. Viana stood near the open-plan engineering pod, leaning against a desk with a fresh cup of coffee, laughing with Marcus and 2 other developers about a bizarre bug that had turned a user interface button upside down overnight. I'm telling you, Marcus, the CSS style sheet has a personal vendetta against you, Viana teased, her laughter bright and relaxed. You don't need a patch, you need an exorcist. Hey, I build backends, not pretty buttons. Marcus complained, grinning. Viana shook her head, tossing her chin back. Precision is the difference between surviving and respawning, Marcus. I expect high standards. She paused mid-sentence. Wait. The exact phrase Gaia had used in the sewer tunnel 2 nights ago. Viana had picked it up without even realizing it. Before Marcus could reply, the heavy glass doors of the elevator bank slid open. Soleil Makiras stepped out onto the floor, flanked by 2 senior vice presidents. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair pinned back with surgical neatness, her expression as icy and detached as ever. The entire engineering pod instantly went quiet. Heads dropped back to keyboards. Soleil walked past the rows of desks, her Louboutin heels clicking against the floor. As she approached Viana's pod, her eyes swept over the team. Viana straightened up, holding her coffee mug, keeping her face neutral. Good morning, Miss Makiras. Soleil stopped. She looked at Viana. For a fraction of a second, Soleil's gray eyes softened. She looked at Viana's relaxed posture, the slight dimple near her lip from her lingering laugh, and listened to the echo of the phrase Viana had just uttered. Precision is the difference between surviving and respawning. Soleil's heart skipped a beat. A subtle, sharp realization flashed through her mind like a high-voltage spark. The sarcastic humor. The razor-sharp cadence. The specific tactical phrasing. It can't be, Soleil thought, her pulse suddenly hammering against her throat beneath her silk collar. Viana Cachiona is Ione? Soleil's gaze locked onto Viana's brown eyes. She didn't say a word for 3 excruciating seconds. The silence in the hallway became deafening. Viana shifted slightly, suddenly feeling very warm under the CEO's intense, unblinking scrutiny. Did I mess up a report? Is my badge pin crooked? Why is she looking at me like she's trying to dismantle my soul? Soleil slowly inclined her head. Good morning, Miss Cachiona, Soleil said, her voice dropping into a low, velvet register that sent a sudden, alarmingly familiar shiver straight down Viana's spine. It was the exact tone Gaia used over encrypted comms when she was thoroughly intrigued. Viana's jaw almost dropped. She stared as Soleil turned and walked away down the corridor, the sharp click of her heels echoing off the walls. Viana touched her collarbone, her heart pounding against her ribs. No way, Viana thought, shaking her head frantically inside her mind. No way. That's just executive aura. Soleil Makiras doesn't even know what a VR headset looks like. Right? Chapter 8. The Corporate Retreat. The mountain air at the Blackwood Ridge Resort was crisp, cold, and entirely unhelpful for Viana's lingering headache. Malivra Software's annual executive and senior lead retreat was an event designed for strategic alignment, high-level road mapping, and forced corporate bonding. To Viana, it meant 5 hours in a luxury shuttle, being dragged out to a remote alpine lodge surrounded by pine trees and 3 feet of snow, and trying not to look directly into the sun or at Soleil Makiras. The lodge's grand hall was standard corporate luxury, massive stone fireplaces, exposed cedar beams, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over a wide-out mountain trail, and an endless supply of artisanal cider. Soleil was, naturally, the focal point of the entire room. She stood near the roaring fire in a high-necked ivory cashmere sweater and dark tailored trousers, looking like she'd stepped off the cover of an Architectural Digest magazine. She held a glass of dark red wine, surrounded by 3 board members and the chief financial officer. Her posture was flawless, her smile measured, and her presence absolute. Viana leaned against a rustic timber pillar 50 feet away, holding a mug of spiked hot chocolate, dressed in her favorite oversized burgundy knits. She hasn't stopped looking at you since the keynote speech, Marcus whispered, sidling up next to Viana with a plate of mini quiches. Viana nearly choked on her drink. What? Don't be ridiculous. I'm serious, Marcus said, popping a quiche into his mouth. Every time you open your mouth during a panel, her head turns like a tracking missile. Did you break something else in the back end? I didn't break anything, Viana muttered, her eyes instinctively darting toward the fireplace. Sure enough, Soleil's gray eyes were already fixed on her. Across the ambient noise of laughing executives, Soleil raised her wine glass by a single millimeter, holding Viana's gaze for 2 long, agonizing seconds before returning to her conversation with the CFO. Viana's face burned. The phantom sensation of a haptic suit tightening around her ribs flashed through her mind. Stop it, she told herself firmly. You're projecting. Gaia is a snarky, tactical gamer who lives in a zero-gravity rig. Soleil is a multi-billionaire CEO who probably hires people to walk her dog. They're not the same person. By 8 o'clock, the sky outside transformed from dull gray to an aggressive blizzard. The wind howled against the lodge's heavy double-pane windows, and the resort management announced that the mountain roads were officially closed until morning. Networking time is over, folks, the VP of HR announced over the microphone. Retrieve your room keys, stay warm, and we'll resume tomorrow at 9. Viana practically sprinted to the elevator. Room 408 was warm, wood-paneled, and possessed a private balcony overlooking the snowy valley. Viana kicked off her boots, pulled her hair down, and immediately unzipped her travel case. She hadn't left her gear behind, not when Elysium was hosting the semi-final preliminary rounds for the seasonal leaderboard. Packed snugly in a padded hardshell case was her portable compact Neuralink kit and lightweight haptic vest. 10 minutes later, Viana was lounging on the king-sized bed, compressed into her vest, with the lightweight travel visor pulled down over her eyes. Identify, she murmured. User, Ione. Neuralink established. Signal routed via satellite uplink. Sensory engagement, 100%. The digital transformation hit her like a blast of warm ozone. Instead of the snowbound resort, Viana opened her eyes inside a rain-soaked abandoned hangar on the outskirts of Sector 9. The heavy sound of digital rainfall and the hum of her assault rifle's power cell replaced the whistling mountain wind. She popped open her squad interface. A single dark blue indicator lit up 5 feet away. Gaia was already there, sitting cross-legged on a wooden crate, her heavy bolt rifle propped up against her knee. GIA, you're late, operative. Viana's heart gave that infuriating, familiar jump inside her chest. She let out a soft laugh, stepping through the simulated puddles toward the sniper. Ione, blame the weather. I'm currently trapped on a mountain in a snowstorm surrounded by corporate suits. In room 412, 4 doors down the hallway of the Blackwood Ridge Resort, Soleil Maqueras was reclined against a pile of plush velvet pillows on her own bed, her lightweight travel visor secure over her face. Soleil's lips twitched into a dark, satisfied smile beneath her visor as she registered Ione's exact wording. Trapped on a mountain in a snowstorm. Got you, Soleil thought, her pulse surging with pure, unadulterated triumph. GIA, a snowstorm? How inconvenient. Are the corporate suits giving you a hard time? Ione, you have no idea, Viana sighed, unslinging her assault rifle and leaning back against the steel wall next to Gaia's crate. The food is pretentious, the cider is overpriced, and my boss spent the entire evening staring at me like I was a high-risk security threat. GIA, perhaps your boss simply finds you interesting. Gaia's voice dropped into that low, magnetic velvet tone, echoing softly through the private squad channel. Viana turned her visor toward the sniper. In the dim, ambient blue light of the digital hangar, Gaia looked almost predatory, composed, dangerous, and entirely focused on her. Ione, my boss is a marble statue with a corner office, Gaia. She doesn't find people interesting. She evaluates them for operational efficiency. GIA, is that so? And how would you rate her operational efficiency? Ione terrifyingly high, Viana admitted, a dry, reluctant smile spreading across her lips. She's brilliant. Annoying, icy, completely out of reach, but brilliant. Soleil's breath hitched in her throat inside her quiet hotel room. The words hit her with the unexpected weight of a physical impact. Annoying. Icy. Out of reach. GIA out of reach? Gaia repeated quietly, shifting her posture on the crate. She reached out, her gloved fingers catching the strap of Viana's tactical vest, pulling the elite assault operative 1 inch closer in the simulation. The haptic feedback buzzed warmly across Viana's ribs, sending a sudden spike through her heart rate monitor. GIA, you don't strike me as someone who gives up easily just because a target is out of reach. Viana swallowed hard, her pulse hammering in her ears. The sensory illusion of the game felt impossibly rich. The smell of rain, the warmth of Gaia's hand, the sheer, intoxicating gravity pulling them together. Ione, that depends on the target, sniper, Viana whispered, leaning into the proximity. Some targets hit back. GIA, good, Gaia murmured, her thumb brushing lightly over the edge of Viana's tactical shoulder plate. I prefer targets that fight back. Before Viana could reply, a loud red warning banner flashed across both of their HUDs. System warning. Extreme weather anomaly detected. Satellite latency dropping. High packet loss imminent. The digital hangar began to flicker with blue static. GA, looks like the snowstorm is interfering with our connection. Ione, yeah. Viana said softly, suddenly feeling reluctant to let go. Looks like it. GIA, get some rest, Ione. Tomorrow, we have a tournament to win. Ione, don't miss your wake-up call, sniper. GIA, I never miss. With a sudden burst of blue pixels, the connection severed, dropping Viana back into the quiet, snowbound darkness of room 408. Viana pulled off her visor, sitting up on the bed, her face flushed, her breathing shallow. She stared out the window at the howling blizzard outside. I am in so much trouble, Viana whispered to the quiet room, pressing her hands against her burning cheeks. For doors down, in room 412, Soleil Maquiras removed her visor. She sat up against her headboard, her dark hair slightly messy, her gray eyes bright with a sharp, dangerous fire. She looked toward the wall shared with the hallway outside, a slow, breathtaking smile spreading across her face. Target acquired, Miss Caccione, Soleil murmured softly into the dark room. Now let's see how you handle the crossfire. Chapter 9, Cold Air, Hot Comms. The morning after the snowstorm, the Blackwood Ridge Resort was bathed in a blinding, crystalline sunlight that reflected off 2 feet of fresh powder. Inside the lodge's grand dining hall, the atmosphere was brisk. Executives and engineers hovered near the breakfast buffet, sipping dark roast coffee and preparing for the final strategic workshops of the retreat. Viana stood near a high-top table near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug. Her brain was a chaotic loop of tactical HUDs, satellite disconnect warnings, and the undeniable memory of Gaia's voice saying, I prefer targets that fight back. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours. Morning, Caccione, Marcus said, dragging himself over with a plate stacked high with pastries. You look like you fought a bear in your sleep. Worse, Viana muttered, taking a long sip of her coffee. I fought my own terrible life choices. Before Marcus could ask for clarification, the room's ambient chatter dropped several decibels. Soleil Maquiras stepped into the dining hall. She wore a fitted charcoal turtleneck, a tailored light gray blazer, and her dark hair fell in soft, elegant waves around her shoulders, a slightly more relaxed look than her usual corporate armor, but no less lethal. Her presence commanded the room instantly. Soleil walked past the breakfast line, her eyes scanning the crowd with cool efficiency until they landed directly on Viana. Instead of moving toward the board members at the head table, Soleil adjusted her course and walked straight toward Viana's high-top table. Marcus instantly froze mid-chew, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the timber floorboards. "Good morning, Marcus," Miss Catriona Soleil said, her voice smooth, warm, and deceptively calm. "Good morning, Miss Makiras," Viana replied, forcing her posture to straighten, keeping her voice perfectly professional despite the sudden jump her heart gave against her ribs. Soleil set her teacup on the wooden table, leaning slightly against the high rim. Her gray eyes locked onto Viana with an intensity that felt terrifyingly personal. "How did you fare during the blizzard last night, Viana?" Soleil asked, her tone conversational, yet loaded with a subtle, electric charge. Viana's eyebrow twitched at the sudden use of her first name. "I managed fine, Miss Makiras. Trapped indoors, but productive." "Is that so?" Soleil tilted her head, a microscopic smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I spent some time reviewing back-end system architecture specs. It occurred to me how rare it is to find someone who moves through complex problems with such aggressive conviction." Viana's breath caught in her throat. Aggressive conviction. The exact phrase Viana had used online to describe her combat style in the hangar just hours ago. Soleil watched the subtle flicker of realization pass across Viana's brown eyes. She leaned in just half an inch closer, her voice dropping into that quiet, velvet register that Viana knew far too well from her headset. "I appreciate engineers who don't panic under pressure," Soleil murmured softly. "Especially when the weather gets cold." Marcus looked back and forth between the CEO and his lead engineer, his jaw practically on the floor, entirely unable to parse the thick, crackling tension suddenly filling the air around their table. Viana swallowed hard, her pulse hammering in her ears. She forced a dry, razor-sharp smile. "I find that panicking just wastes time, Miss Makiras. I prefer to hit back." Soleil's eyes flared with a dark, satisfied heat. She picked up her tea, inclining her head gracefully. "I know you do," Soleil said softly. "Enjoy your breakfast." She turned and walked smoothly away toward the executive lounge, leaving Viana standing by the window, her hands trembling slightly against her mug, her mind spinning in absolute overdrive. "No," Viana thought frantically, her eyes following the smooth, confident stride of those Louboutins across the floor. "No, no, no. There is no way." That night, back in their respective hotel rooms before the departure shuttles were scheduled for the morning, the 2v2 preliminary finals for Elysium kicked off. The match was set in Sector 12, a high-altitude, open-air steel bridge spanning a deep mountain chasm, swept by gale-force winds and heavy snowfall. It was a sniper's dream and a close combat nightmare. Viana locked into her rig, her visor initiating the neural link. User, Ione. Sensory engagement, 100%. The howling digital wind slammed into her senses. Viana stood on the rain-slicked steel beams of the bridge, her assault rifle primed, her tactical vest humming with live combat telemetry. Beside her, Gaia dropped into a low crouch, unslinging her heavy anti-material bolt rifle with fluid, practiced precision. GIA, opposing squad is ranked rank 3 globally. 2 heavy assault units with reinforced energy shields. They push aggressive. Ione, let them push, Viana growled, her adrenaline surging to wipe out the lingering confusion from the morning. I'll draw their fire on the lower walkway. You take out their shield generators from the gantry. GIA, watch your left flank, Ione. The wind velocity is high. I won't have line of sight if you drop too far into the canyon. Ione, just shoot straight, sniper. I'll keep them busy. GIA, I always shoot straight. The match commenced. The opposing duo pushed fast, throwing heavy plasma grenades to choke Viana's movement on the narrow bridge. Viana sprinted forward, dropping into a high-speed slide beneath the incoming plasma fire, her assault rifle roaring as she stripped the first enemy's outer armor. Above her, Gaia's heavy rifle fired in rhythm, crack. A tracer round tore through the storm, instantly shattering the second enemy's shield generator. They were executing with terrifying synergy. But the opposing squad was smart. The primary heavy unit launched a magnetic tether, pinning Viana against the bridge's outer railing. The second enemy flanked around the support pillar, aiming a high-impact rail gun directly at Viana's exposed side armor. Gaia Ione. Move. The warning shouted in Viana's earpiece wasn't cool or analytical. It was sharp, sudden, and raw with genuine panic. Before the enemy could pull the trigger, a dark shadow dropped from the upper gantry 30 feet above. Gaia didn't just take a shot, she physically threw her avatar between Viana and the incoming railgun blast. Boom! The heavy railgun slug slammed directly into Gaia's chest plate. Through the microactuators of the haptic rig, the impact hit both players in shared proximity. Gaia's health bar plunged 90% into the critical red zone. The kinetic force sent Gaia stumbling backward, her armor smoking, her body collapsing against the steel railing right beside Viana. Viana's eyes went wide behind her visor. Gaia. Without thinking, Viana lunged forward. I told you, operative. Gaia whispered, her voice low, raspy, and thick with an emotion that sent a shockwave straight through Viana's soul. I don't let people hurt my partner. Viana froze. The sensory feedback in her suit registered every detail, the weight of Gaia against her knees, the warmth of her hand, the intense, unyielding connection between them. Inside her quiet hotel room, Viana sat on her bed under her visor, tears of pure, overwhelming adrenaline pricking at her eyes, her chest heaving. Ione, you absolute idiot, Viana murmured softly, leaning her visor down until it was resting against Gaia's forehead in the digital snow. You're an absolute, brilliant idiot. Gaia let out a soft, breathless laugh, her thumb tracing a small circle against Viana's neck. GIA, same time tomorrow, Ione. For the championship. Ione, same time tomorrow. Chapter 10, System Overheat. Monday afternoon back at Malivra Software headquarters was a pressure cooker with a taped-down valve. A critical core server cluster in the downtown data center had experienced a catastrophic thermal cascade during peak trading hours. Red alerts were flashing across every monitor on the tech floor. Alarm chimes echoed down the corridors, and developers were running between pods with sweat on their brows and panic in their eyes. Down in the primary engineering hub, Viana was fully in her element. She stood in the center of the room, her gray hoodie sleeves pushed up to her elbows, her hair tied back in a messy knot, shouting clear, precise commands over the din of screaming terminal alerts. Marcus, reroute the secondary load balancer to the cloud array, Viana ordered, pointing a marker at the dry erase board covered in rapid architecture diagrams. Dave, isolate cluster 4 before the memory leak corrupts the persistent storage. I'm taking manual override on the routing protocols. Viana, the failover script is hanging at 60%. Marcus yelled back, his hands shaking over his keyboard. If the main gateway drops, Malivra loses live telemetry for 30 enterprise accounts. It's not going to drop. Viana snapped, her voice carrying an absolute, unbreakable command tone. I'm cutting the lock loops manually. Stand by for force push on my mark. Up on the glass balcony of the 60th floor, Soleil Maqueras stood leaning against the polished chrome railing, looking down into the open-plan engineering hub below. She wasn't looking at the red diagnostic screens. She was looking at Viana. Soleil watched as Viana moved between workstations with fluid, instinctual grace. There was zero hesitation in Viana's movements, no panic in her eyes, only a cold, fierce, laser-focused intelligence. She moved like an elite squad leader in the middle of a war zone, barking orders, taking the hit and commanding the space with terrifying authority. Soleil's chest tightened, a dark, hot thrill coiling deep in her stomach. Look at you, Soleil thought, her lips curving into a slow, breathless smile as she took a slow sip of her cold espresso. Fierce, brilliant, and completely unstoppable. Force push executed. Viana's voice echoed from below, followed instantly by the high-pitched chime of system recovery. Across the room, 60 diagnostic monitors turned from flashing crimson to steady, brilliant green. The engineering pod erupted into gasps of relief and applause. Marcus collapsed backward into his chair, wiping his forehead. Viana let out a long, shaky exhale, resting her hands on her hips, a triumphant, competitive grin breaking across her face. She turned her head naturally, her eyes sweeping up toward the glass balcony, and caught Soleil staring straight down at her. Soleil didn't look away. She didn't pretend to be reading a tablet. She stood at the railing, holding Viana's gaze in front of the entire floor. Slowly, deliberately, Soleil raised her espresso cup toward Viana in a silent, private toast. A subtle, smoldering smirk played on the CEO's lips, the exact look Gaia gave her over a smoking rifle. Viana's heart took a violent, sudden thud against her ribs. Her face flushed hot beneath her skin, the breath catching hard in her throat. Oh God, Viana thought, her mind spinning into absolute chaos as Soleil turned and melted back into the shadows of the executive suite. Oh God, oh God, oh God. By 11:30 p.m., the real-world chaos had settled, leaving Viana pacing back and forth across her apartment living room in her socks. Her brain was on fire. The terrifyingly precise overlap between her Ice Queen boss and her online nemesis was becoming impossible to ignore, but every rational bone in her body screamed that it was a statistical impossibility. She's a CEO, Viana muttered to herself, pulling on her compression haptic vest with aggressive tugs. She signs stock options. She doesn't drop flashbangs down elevator shafts. She settled into her zero-gravity rig and pulled down her VR visor, desperate for the clarity of Sector 9. User, Ione. Sensory engagement, 100%. The neon-lit rain and ozone of Elysium settled around her like a second skin. She spawned onto the rain-slicked balcony of a high-rise communications tower overlooking the sector. Gaia was already there, leaning against the ledge with her matte black rifle slung over her shoulder, watching the digital city below. Ione, you're early, Viana said, stepping up beside the sniper, her voice carrying an edge of nervous adrenaline. Gaia turned her head. The cold blue light of her optic visor swept over Viana's avatar. "GA, I had a feeling you'd be online early tonight," Gaia replied in that low, velvet voice that sent a shiver straight down Viana's spine. "You had a heavy afternoon, didn't you?" Viana froze. "How could you possibly?" "GIA, your telemetry data," Gaia interrupted smoothly, stepping half an inch closer. "Your heart rate baseline is elevated. You move like someone who's spent 5 hours defusing a bomb." Viana let out a dry, incredulous laugh, shaking her head. "Ione, something like that." A massive system outage. The whole floor was losing their minds. "GIA, except you." Viana looked up into Gaia's visor. The proximity between them was intoxicating. Through the micro-actuators of the haptic vest, the warm, steady hum of Gaia's armor radiated against Viana's chest. "GA, I watched a leader take control of a chaotic situation today, Ione. It's a remarkably attractive trait." Viana's breath hitched. Her pulse spiked violently on her HUD's biomonitor. "Ione, Gaia, what did you just say?" Gaia reached out, her gloved fingers gently catching the edge of Viana's jawline on her avatar, tipping her face upward. The haptic feedback was so precise that Viana felt the warmth of individual fingers pressing against her skin in her dark apartment. "GIA," I said. "I like people who don't panic under pressure," Gaia whispered softly, her voice dropping into a thrilling, intimate purr. "Especially when they look as magnificent as you do when you're winning." Viana swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Ione, you're breaking Rule 1, sniper," Viana whispered back, her voice raspy, her body leaning instinctively into the touch. "No personal comments." GIA, screw rule 1, Gaia murmured. Gaia's thumb brushed lightly over the soft contour of Viana's digital lips, sending a sudden, intoxicating wave of heat straight through Viana's body. GIA, tomorrow night is the Grand Championship, Ione. After we take number 1 on the leaderboard, I think it's time we stop hiding behind these visors. Viana's eyes widened behind her headset, her breathing shallow and fast. Ione, are you asking to meet me? Gaia let out a low, dark, breathtaking laugh that vibrated all the way down Viana's spine. GA, I'm not asking, operative. I'm giving you coordinates. Don't be late. Chapter 11. The Beta Test. Tuesday morning at Malivera Software felt like walking into an airless glass vault. By 10 o'clock, Viana was summoned directly to the subterranean level, a high-security, restricted-access lab beneath the main building. The room was lined with matte black acoustic dampening panels, bathed in soft blue LED strip lighting, and smelled faintly of fresh silicone and warm server banks. In the center of the room sat a prototype zero-gravity testing rig, suspended by pneumatic hydraulics. Standing beside it was Soleil Makiras, dressed in a sharp, slate-gray suit that hugged her frame with severe precision. Beside her stood 2 lead researchers in white lab coats. Miss Caccione, Soleil said softly as the heavy glass security door hissed shut behind Viana. Thank you for coming down. Viana kept her posture rigid, her tablet tucked under her arm. Miss Makiras. Marcus said you needed an architecture evaluation on the new hardware integration. More than an evaluation, Soleil replied, turning to face her fully. Her gray eyes were bright with a dark, calculating intensity. Malivera is quietly providing the core spatial processing unit for an unannounced, ultra-high-fidelity military VR engine. We're conducting live human interface latency tests today. Soleil gestured to the sleek, black zero-gravity rig in the center of the room. I need an engineer with superior spatial awareness to run the calibration suite. Someone who understands how tactical movement translates into neural feedback. Viana looked at the rig. It was an industrial-grade version of her personal setup at home, only 10 times more responsive. You want me to demo it? Viana asked, raising an eyebrow. Unless you're hesitant? Soleil countered smoothly, taking a slow step closer, a subtle, challenging smirk playing on her lips. I assume someone of your tactical standard wouldn't shy away from a high-stakes stress test. Viana's jaw set. Oh, you're playing with fire, Ice Queen. I don't shy away from tests, Miss Makiras, Viana said, setting her tablet on a side table. 5 minutes later, Viana was strapped into the hydraulic testing frame, pulling the lightweight carbon fiber prototype visor down over her eyes. The micro-actuators in the suit fired up, snugging tightly against her torso and limbs. System initialized, the lead researcher called out from the terminal wall. Loading combat sandbox module. Begin movement sequence when ready, Miss Caccione. Inside the visor, the black void transformed into a stark, neon-grid training arena filled with moving obstacles, low walls, and high-speed target drones. Viana didn't just run the calibration suite, she owned it. The moment the first drone spawned, Viana's body went on absolute autopilot. She dropped into a lightning-fast combat slide, vaulted over a 4-foot barrier, and executed a fluid, blind spin kick that clipped a target drone right out of the air, all while maintaining perfect, low-center balance in the physical rig. She moved with an elite, terrifying fluidity, her instincts sharp as a honed blade, dodging simulated plasma fire and dropping target after target with ruthless, rhythmic precision. Outside the headset, in the quiet, blue-lit lab, Soleil stood motionless. She watched Viana's real-world body move in the rig. The precise sway of her hips, the sharp, aggressive tilt of her shoulders, the instinctual way her hands formed tactical weapon grips in midair. It was a mirror image. Every single micro-movement was identical to the physical avatar of Ione in Elysium. Soleil felt the blood rush to her ears, her pulse hammering against her ribs like a sledgehammer. The final, microscopic piece of doubt dissolved entirely from her mind. It really is her, Soleil thought, her breathing shallow, a deep, intoxicating heat flushing down her neck. The brilliant, sarcastic, unstoppable engineer sitting 60 feet below my office is the woman who's been driving me wild in the game for 4 months. Inside the visor, the sandbox run ended. System calibration complete. Latency 0.02 miss accuracy 99.8%. Viana pulled off the visor, her face flushed with adrenaline, a few dark strands of hair clinging to her damp forehead. She exhaled a long, shaky breath and looked over at Soleil. Calibration passed, Viana said, her voice slightly breathless, offering a cool, confident grin. How was the data, Miss Makiras? Soleil didn't answer immediately. She slowly walked over to the edge of the testing platform, looking up at Viana in the rig. Up close, the air between them felt dangerously charged, thick with an unspoken truth that made the walls of the small lab feel like they were closing in around them. Soleil reached up, her long, elegant fingers brushing lightly against the side of Viana's cheek to adjust the visor's neural clip, a touch that lingered for 2 excruciating seconds, sending a violent shockwave of heat straight down Viana's spine. The data was breathtaking, Viana, Soleil whispered, her voice dropping into that low, velvet purr that sent cold chills and hot sparks through Viana's blood simultaneously. Viana's brown eyes widened, her chest heaving, her hands gripping the rig's armrests. You move like a soldier who's used to surviving in the rain, Soleil added softly, her gray eyes locking onto Viana's lips with smoldering intensity before stepping back. Very impressive, operative. Viana's heart nearly slammed right out of her ribcage. Operative. Viana sat frozen in the hydraulic rig, her mind reeling in absolute, terrifying, glorious shock as Soleil turned and walked toward the exit door, her Louboutin heels clicking against the concrete floor. Get cleaned up, Miss Caccione, Soleil called over her shoulder, without looking back. We have a very important evening ahead of us. Chapter 12, Tactical Interrogation. The executive corner office on the 60th floor was bathed in the blood-orange glow of the setting sun. Below, the city's skyline gleamed like broken glass, but inside, the room was quiet, cool, and suffocatingly tense. Viana stood just inside the heavy oak double doors, her tablet clutched tightly against her chest. Her mind was an absolute battlefield. Operative. The word had been bouncing around her skull for the last 3 hours like a stray bullet. Was it a coincidence? Was it tech industry jargon? Or had the Ice Queen CEO standing at the floor-to-ceiling window actually connected the dots? Soleil turned around slowly. She had discarded her blazer, wearing only a tailored silk blouse with the sleeves rolled back to her forearms. She held 2 crystal glasses half-filled with amber scotch. Come in, Viana, Soleil said, her voice dropping into that smooth, low register that sent a dangerous thrill down Viana's spine. Close the door. Viana swallowed hard, stepping into the room. The heavy acoustic doors clicked shut behind her with the finality of a bunker seal. Miss Makiras, Viana began, keeping her voice as steady and professional as humanly possible. Marcus said you wanted a final debrief on the Project Aegis integration specs before the end-of-day deploy? Forget Marcus. And forget the deployment specs, Soleil said calmly. She walked over, stopping just 2 feet in front of Viana, and handed her one of the crystal glasses. Drink. You've had a long day in the subterranean lab. Viana looked at the amber liquid, then up into Soleil's striking gray eyes. Up close, without a boardroom table separating them, the physical gravity of the CEO was overwhelming. Thank you, Viana said softly, taking a slow sip. The burn hit her throat, grounding her slightly. So, if we aren't discussing Aegis, what is this meeting about? Soleil leaned back against the edge of her dark mahogany desk, crossing her ankles. She swirled the ice in her glass, watching Viana with a dark, calculating intensity. I'm conducting a personal evaluation, Soleil murmured. I'm interested in how my top talent handles unexpected strategic engagements. Strategic engagements? Viana raised an eyebrow, leaning into her natural defense mechanism, dry, razor-sharp sarcasm. I'm an engineer, Miss Makiras. My strategic engagements usually involve killing memory leaks and keeping servers from melting down. Is that all? Soleil tilted her head, a slow, breathtaking smile spreading across her lips, one that was entirely devoid of corporate distance and packed with pure, lethal intimacy. Because I've been observing your work very closely, Viana. You don't just solve problems, you flank them. You choke the bottlenecks, you cut the dead weight, and you re-engage instantly. Viana's heart took a violent, sudden thud against her ribs. Her fingers tightened around her glass. Cut the dead weight and re-engage instantly. Soleil set her glass on the desk behind her and took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them until Viana could smell the faint, intoxicating scent of lavender and white tea. Tell me, Miss Cacchione, Soleil whispered, leaning in slightly, her gaze dropping to Viana's lips before rising back to her eyes. If you were pinned down on a narrow, rain-slicked bridge, facing two heavy units with energy shields, what would your protocol be? Viana froze. The air left her lungs completely. Sector 12. The 2v2 preliminary finals. The world spun on its axis. The pieces clicked together with the force of a high-impact railgun slug. The cold, flawless precision. The dark, arrogant humor. The unyielding, protective fire. The low, velvet voice that sounded identical over encrypted comms. Gaia. Soleil Makiras, the untouchable, multi-billionaire CEO of Malivera Software, was the snarky, elite sniper who had been tearing up her leaderboard, saving her flank and driving her insane for 4 months. You. Viana gasped, her voice barely a breath, her brown eyes wide with absolute, stunned disbelief. It's you. Soleil didn't blink. She didn't offer a corporate smile. She simply raised one dark eyebrow, her gray eyes burning with an intense, triumphant heat. You took a railgun blast for me, Viana whispered, her brain completely scrambling as she stared at her boss. You sit in a zero-gravity rig and play military VR? I don't just play, operative, Soleil murmured, stepping close enough that the front of her silk blouse nearly brushed Viana's chest. I win. And I always protect my partner. Viana let out a short, incredulous laugh, shaking her head frantically as a wild, electric thrill flushed through her entire body. I called you an ice queen. I told you to your face over comms that you were manufactured in a Swiss cryogenic facility. You did, Soleil agreed softly, her thumb reaching out to gently trace the warm line of Viana's jawline, the exact tactile movement she had executed in the game just 24 hours earlier. And I believe you also said I was beautiful, terrifying, and that you wanted to shoot me in the face. Viana's breath hitched, her pulse hammering against Soleil's fingers resting on her skin. The tension in the office was suffocating, crackling with 4 months of built-up digital rivalry and explosive real-world chemistry. You knew, Viana accused, her voice raspy, leaning subtly into the touch despite her shock. How long have you known? Since the retreat, Soleil whispered, her thumb brushing over the soft contour of Viana's lower lip. When you told me I was staring at you like a high-risk security threat. You were right, Viana. You are a threat. To my focus, to my self-control, and to my leaderboard rank. Viana's dry sarcasm finally returned, a wicked, breathtaking grin breaking across her face as she looked into the eyes of her CEO and her sniper. Is that so, Miss Makiras? Viana purred, stepping directly into Soleil's space, refusing to back down an inch. Then what are you going to do about it? Soleil's eyes flared with a dark, smoldering heat. She leaned down until her lips were a fraction of an inch from Viana's ear. Tonight is the Grand Championship, Ione, Soleil whispered, her breath hot against Viana's skin. We take the #1 spot on the global grid, and then I'm taking you out to dinner. Soleil pulled back, taking her glass from the desk, her expression reverting back to smooth executive perfection, though the dangerous spark in her eyes remained. Dismissed, Miss Cacchiona, Soleil said softly. Don't be late for the drop. Viana stood there for 3 seconds, her heart pounding like a war drum, a breathless, wild smile plastered across her face. I never miss a drop, boss, Viana whispered, turning and walking out of the corner office, her head spinning in the absolute best way possible. Chapter 13, The Championship Round. The digital atmosphere of the Elysium Grand Championship Arena was pure, high-octane sensory overload. The battleground was Sector 0, a floating, colossal warzone set in the eye of a hyper-futuristic storm. Skybridges spiraled around towering chrome spires, rain lashed against structural force fields, and lightning illuminated the dark canyon below. Tens of thousands of spectator avatars line the outer atmospheric grid, their collective roars echoing as a deep, reverberating bass through the haptic rig. In the staging bay, Ione and Gaia stood side by side. In the real world, Viana was sitting in her ergonomic rig in her gray hoodie, her pulse racing so fast her biomonitor flickered yellow. For doors away from the memory of that high-rise office confrontation, she was locked into the grid with her boss, the woman who had pinned her against a mahogany desk with a single look just hours prior. Viana turned her avatar's head toward the matte black sniper standing next to her. Ione, so, Miss Makiras. Should I be calling you ma'am over the tactical net? A low, velvety laugh vibrated through Viana's earpiece, smooth, dark, and utterly devoid of boardroom restraint. GIA, try it, operative, and I'll drop an orbital strike on your position. Ione noted. Just checking protocol for corporate compliance. GIA, our current protocol is total dominance. Look at the leaderboard. Viana expanded her HUD. Sitting across the bracket was the defending champion duo, Apex and Dread, two heavy assault juggernauts who had held the #1 spot on the global grid for 3 consecutive seasons. They were ruthlessly efficient, heavily armored, and famously aggressive. System, final round commencing in 3, 2, 1. Engage. The staging barrier dissolved, and chaos exploded. Apex and Dread pushed instantly, closing the distance along the central skybridge under a heavy barrage of suppressive plasma fire. The impact of the rounds slammed into Viana's shield, sending intense haptic shockwaves rattling through her suit, forcing her back into a slide behind a reinforced concrete pillar. They're trying to pin us in the spawn point. Viana called out, her voice dropping into pure, sharp combat focus. I can't flank without drawing both their sight lines. Then don't flank, Gaia's calm, commanding voice sliced through the audio static. From her elevated perch on a shattered stone arch 40 meters above, Gaia swung her massive bolt-action anti-material rifle into position. Draw them onto the bridge, Ione, Soleil commanded, her voice low, intimate, and fiercely confident. Give me 3 seconds of clear trajectory. I'll open the door. You've got 2, Viana yelled back, a wicked grin breaking out under her visor inside her apartment. Viana vaulted over the pillar into the open rain, deliberately exposing her side armor to draw Apex's heavy railgun line. The bait worked instantly. Apex pivoted his heavy turret to lock onto Viana. Thumbcrack. Soleil fired. The heavy anti-material round didn't target Apex. It struck the structural release latch of the overhead crane directly above him. A massive steel girder dropped like a guillotine, shattering Apex's energy barrier and crushing his position. Now, Ione. Soleil barked. Viana didn't wait. She activated her mobility thrusters, rocketing through the smoke and debris like a lethal shadow. She closed the distance on Dread, sliding beneath his defensive sweep, and drove her secondary combat blade straight into his primary power cell before unspooling a full magazine into his chest plate. System, elimination, dread. One down. Viana shouted, rolling back into cover as Apex burst out from the rubble, his armor smoking, his heavy miniguns spinning up to full velocity. Apex let out an automated battle cry over the arena speakers, locking his sights directly onto Viana at point-blank range. Viana's primary weapon clicked dry. Out of ammo. Gaia. Viana gasped. I have you, Soleil whispered into the squad channel. Soleil dropped from the stone arch 40 feet up, executing a free-fall drop through the digital storm. She landed heavily on the steel bridge directly between Viana and Apex, her sidearms unholstered in a blur of motion. In a synchronized ballet of sheer combat instinct, Soleil fired 3 rapid armor-piercing rounds into Apex's visor joint, while Viana unclipped a high-yield flash grenade from Soleil's tactical harness, armed it, and slammed it into Apex's chest plate. Boom! The shockwave blew out the surrounding atmospheric shields, sending blue digital pixels cascading into the storm like falling stars. System, victory. New global #1 rank, Ione and Gaia. The roar of the arena crowd hit them like a tidal wave. The massive leaderboard overhead illuminated in blinding, shimmering gold light, flashing their names at the very top of the world. Side by side on the smoking skybridge, the 2 avatars stood in the rain. Viana's avatar was breathing heavily, her armor scorched, her pulse monitor humming in the high red zone. Beside her, Soleil unslung her heavy rifle, letting it drop to the steel deck with a heavy metallic clang. Soleil turned to face Viana. Step by step, Soleil closed the distance between them until their chest plates were nearly touching. Through the microactuators of the haptic rig, the warmth and physical presence of Soleil radiated through Viana's entire body. Soleil reached up with both gloved hands, slowly unclasping the latches of her matte black helmet. She pulled it off, tossing it aside, revealing her digital avatar's face, striking, dark-haired, with piercing gray eyes that mirrored the woman who ran Malivra software. Your move, partner, Soleil whispered, her voice rich with smoldering satisfaction. Viana reached up and unlatched her own helmet, letting it drop to the floor. For the first time in 4 months, they looked directly into each other's eyes without visors, without corporate titles, and without barriers. We did it, Viana said, her voice dropping into a breathless, stunned laugh. We actually took #1. Of course we did, Soleil murmured. Her hand reached out, her fingers gently cupping Viana's cheek. The tactile feedback in the suit registered the unbelievable warmth of her skin, the subtle tremble in her fingers. I told you, Viana, we move as one unit. Soleil leaned in, her gray eyes locking onto Viana's lips in the digital light of the grand arena. GIA, private ping sent, Soleil whispered directly into Viana's audio receiver, her breath hot against Viana's skin. A tiny notification popped up on the corner of Viana's HUD. Private MSG GIA tomorrow night. 8 p.m. The penthouse at the Luminary high-rise. Formal wear. Don't make your CEO wait. Viana looked up into Soleil's eyes, a dangerous, thrilling smirk spreading across her face. Ione, I'll be on time, boss. Just make sure the wine is as good as your shooting. Soleil let out a dark, breathtaking laugh, her thumb tracing over Viana's lower lip one last time before initiating the log-out sequence. See you tomorrow, operative, Soleil whispered. With a flash of gold light, the arena dissolved, leaving Viana sitting in her dark apartment, her heart hammering wildly, holding her breath in the quiet room. Chapter 14. The target revealed. By 7:45 p.m. on Friday, Viana stood on the marble plaza outside the Luminary, the most exclusive residential high-rise in the financial district, feeling completely out of her depth in the best possible way. She had swapped her oversized gray hoodies for a tailored black jumpsuit with a sharp, plunging neckline and an immaculate silhouette. Her hair fell in smooth waves over her shoulders, and a quiet, Nervous adrenaline hummed through her veins like live wire. In her hand, she held a small, sleek matte black case containing a custom zero-latency neural chip she had coded herself, a gift for her co-op partner. The heavy glass doors opened, and the private concierge greeted her with a respectful nod. "Miss Caccione? Miss Makiras is expecting you on the top floor. Private elevator on the left." Viana stepped into the elevator. The brushed chrome doors hissed shut, cutting off the noise of the city below. As the elevator began its smooth, lightning-fast ascent, Viana watched the digital floor counter climb toward 80. She took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the fabric over her ribs. For 4 months, she had known Gaia as a voice in an earpiece, a matte black silhouette in the digital rain, and an infuriatingly brilliant rival. For 4 days, she had known her as Soleil Makiras, her boss, her CEO, and the most captivating woman she had ever met. Ding! The door slid open directly into the private entryway of the penthouse. The apartment was breathtaking. Soaring floor-to-ceiling glass windows wrapped around the perimeter, offering an uninterrupted panoramic view of the glowing metropolitan skyline below. Ambient light was low, provided by soft architectural recessed lighting and the roaring flame of a double-sided marble fireplace. And standing near the glass, holding 2 crystal glasses of vintage red wine, was Soleil. She was breathtaking. Soleil wore a floor-length dark crimson silk gown that hugged every line of her body with dangerous elegance. Her dark hair was styled back, revealing her sharp cheekbones, and her signature Louboutins clicked softly as she turned to face Viana. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. The real world felt suddenly, intoxicatingly tiny. Soleil's gray eyes swept over Viana from head to toe, a slow, smoldering heat flaring behind her gaze that made Viana's breath hitch in her throat. "You're right on time, operative," Soleil said, her voice dropping into that low, velvet register that sent a violent wave of heat straight down Viana's spine. Viana stepped out of the elevator, a dry, confident smirk breaking across her face as she found her footing. "Rule 2, remember? Total tactical cohesion. I don't miss coordinates, Miss Makiras." Soleil walked over, stopping just 2 inches away. The faint, intoxicating scent of lavender and white tea wrapped around Viana, instant and overwhelming. Soleil set one of the wine glasses into Viana's hand, her long fingers brushing intentionally over Viana's knuckles. "We aren't in the office, Viana," Soleil murmured softly, her gray eyes locking onto Viana's brown ones with fierce, unyielding intensity. "And we aren't in Sector 9. Call me Soleil." "Soleil," Viana repeated slowly, testing the weight of the name on her tongue. It felt warm, intimate, and thrillingly dangerous. "Soleil." Soleil's lips twitched into a breathtaking, genuine smile. She raised her glass. "To the global #1 duo. To breaking every rule in the book," Viana added, clinking her glass against Soleil's. They took a slow sip, neither of them breaking eye contact. The electric, crackling chemistry that had been building between them across boardrooms, high-altitude sky bridges, and subterranean labs was practically glowing in the ambient light of the penthouse. Viana set her glass down on the obsidian console table nearby and handed Soleil the small black case. "A victory present. Custom neural routing chip. Latency is down to 0.01 milliseconds. I coded it last night." Soleil accepted the case, looking down at it, then back up at Viana. Something ridiculously soft and genuinely touched flickered across her sharp features. "You spent your victory night coding hardware optimizations for me?" Soleil asked softly. "I told you," Viana said, stepping half an inch closer, her eyes dropping to Soleil's lips before rising back to her gray eyes. "I prefer partners who don't lag." Soleil let out a low, breathless laugh, a sound so rich and authentic that it made Viana's chest ache. Soleil set the case down next to her glass, turning back to face Viana fully. "Do you have any idea how much you drove me insane over the last 4 months?" Soleil whispered, stepping into Viana's space until the front of her crimson gown brushed against Viana's jumpsuit. I have a vague idea, Viana purred, her confidence rising to meet Soleil's fire. Probably about as much as you drove me insane when you pulled my pin on the crane in Sector 9. It was an effective strategy, Soleil murmured, her hands slowly rising to rest against Viana's waist. Her touch was warm, firm, and possessive, sending a shockwave straight through Viana's blood. It was a cheap move, sniper, Viana corrected, her breath hitching as Soleil's hands tightened gently on her hips, pulling her flush against her body. Then let me make it up to you, Soleil whispered. Soleil leaned in, her gray eyes darkening as she tilted her head. The target was revealed. There were no visors, no haptic suits, no corporate boundaries, and no digital reins separating them anymore. When Soleil's lips finally met Viana's, the collision was instant, fiery, and explosive, a 4-month crossfire of rivalry, banter, and unspoken desire exploding into absolute, breathless reality. Chapter 15. Friendly Fire. The kiss was equal parts strategic takeover and absolute surrender. There was no haptic suit to translate the heat, no digital latency to cushion the impact. When Soleil's lips pressed against Viana's, it was real, tactile, and completely overwhelming. Soleil's hands moved from Viana's waist to cup the back of her neck, her fingers tangling into Viana's dark hair with a quiet, fierce desperation that proved the untouchable CEO was entirely out of corporate coldness. Viana let out a soft, breathless sound against Soleil's mouth, her own hands rising to grip the front of Soleil's crimson silk dress. She pulled Soleil closer, deepening the kiss, matching her intensity move for move, just as she always did on the grid. When they finally broke apart for air, their foreheads rested together in the quiet, ambient light of the penthouse. They sat close together, the massive expanse of the night sky framed in the glass behind them. Soleil poured another 2 fingers of scotch, while Viana unspooled the sheer absurdity of the last few months out loud. I still can't get over it, Viana said, shaking her head as she leaned back against the cushions. Soleil Makiras. The woman who made Marcus faint twice this week in a status meeting is the same person who dropped a flashbang at my feet in Sector 9 because she was losing a knife fight. I was not losing, Soleil interjected instantly, raising an eyebrow over her glass. It was a tactical denial of your objective. You blew yourself up. And who won the match, Viana? You are unbelievable, Viana laughed, leaning her shoulder against Soleil's. The physical warmth between them was addicting, grounded, real, and entirely free of the corporate masks they both wore during the day. Soleil set her glass down, her expression softening into something rare, quiet, and deeply vulnerable. She reached out, taking Viana's hand, lacing their fingers together. I spend my entire life surrounded by people who agree with me because they're afraid of me, or who talk to me because they want something from Malivra, Soleil said quietly, her gray eyes looking into Viana's with absolute sincerity. When I stepped onto the grid 4 months ago and met Ione, you didn't bow. You didn't care who I was in the real world. You just gave me absolute hell, met every challenge with fire, and pushed me harder than anyone ever has. Viana's heart swelled, her thumb gently brushing over the back of Soleil's hand. You did the same for me, Viana admitted softly. I was drowning in corporate burnout. Elysium was an escape, but you made it feel alive. Even when you were shooting at me from 3 miles away. Soleil smirked, leaning in until her lips brushed against Viana's jawline, sending a thrill down Viana's spine. I'll always keep my sights on you, operative. Is that a threat or a promise? Viana purred, turning her head to capture Soleil's lips once more. Both, Soleil whispered against her mouth. Definitely both. Hours later, the penthouse was quiet, bathed in the dim embers of the fireplace and the steady glow of the metropolis 80 stories below. Viana lay stretched out on the oversized leather sectional, her head resting comfortably against Soleil's lap. Soleil's long fingers were lazily twirling a lock of Viana's hair, her posture completely relaxed, a sight that no board member, shareholder, or executive at Malivra Software would ever believe existed. On the glass coffee table in front of them sat two sleek VR visors, resting side by side, their diagnostic lights pulsing in synchronized standby mode. "We have the Global Finals victory press release dropping on the Elysium network tomorrow," Viana murmured, her eyes half closed in content relaxation. "The entire community is dying to know who Ione and Gaia are." Soleil smiled, her thumb gently stroking Viana's temple. "Let them wonder. The grid belongs to us. But tomorrow morning, we have a 9 o'clock executive briefing on Project Aegis." Viana opened one eye, looking up at her CEO with a playful, mischievous grin. "Does that mean I have to call you Miss Macheras again in front of Marcus?" "In the boardroom, yes," Soleil replied, her eyes flaring with that familiar, dangerous spark. "But if you refactor my memory allocation routines without asking, I might just have to order you back up to the penthouse for a mandatory disciplinary review." Viana sat up slowly, wrapping her arms around Soleil's neck, pulling her down into another breathless, lingering kiss. "I look forward to the audit, boss," Viana whispered against her lips. Chapter 16. Compliance Approved. The Malivra Software Human Resources Department was located on the 42nd floor, a quiet oasis of modular desks, muted teal acoustic panels, and HR representatives who spent 90% of their lives managing corporate liability. At 9 a.m. on Monday, Director of HR Arthur Vance was sipping his second chamomile tea when his office door slid open. In walked Soleil Macheras, looking every bit the ruthless multi-billionaire CEO in a razor-sharp cream suit, holding a crisp manila folder. Right behind her was Viana Caccione, wearing her signature oversized charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, and a cup of black coffee, looking completely unbothered. Arthur nearly choked on his tea, scrambling to his feet. "Miss Macheras. Good morning. We didn't have an appointment on the executive calendar." "Relax, Arthur," Soleil said smoothly, stepping into the office and taking one of the guest chairs. She gestured for Viana to sit beside her. Viana sank into the chair with an easy, fluid grace, crossing her legs. Soleil placed the manila folder on Arthur's desk with a soft, authoritative clack. "We're here to file a voluntary personal relationship disclosure," Soleil stated, her voice as calm and matter-of-fact as if she were reading a quarterly balance sheet. Arthur froze, his hand hovering over his keyboard. A what?" "A relationship disclosure," Viana supplied helpful, taking a slow sip of her coffee and flashing Arthur a warm, mischievous grin. Section 4, Paragraph B of the Employee Handbook. Conflicts of interest and interpersonal dynamics. Arthur looked between the CEO, the woman who had fired a board member last year via a 3-word text message, and the lead software engineer who had single-handedly saved the core server array 6 days ago. "I'm just adhering to corporate decorum, Miss Macheras," Viana teased, taking a slow, deliberate step backward toward the CEO's glass office doors, her smile pure sharp banter. "After all, you're the executive authority here. Wouldn't want to break protocol, Chief." Soleil didn't say another word. In two long, predatory strides, Soleil closed the distance, grabbing Viana by the waist and backing her smoothly up against the heavy frosted glass door of her office. The impact was soft, but the physical authority behind it was absolute. Soleil's hands locked around Viana's hips, pulling her flush against her frame, while her head leaned down until their lips were a hair-breadth apart. "Say that title again," Soleil whispered, her breath hot against Viana's mouth, her fingers digging lightly into the fabric of Viana's hoodie. "Say it one more time and see if I don't lock this door for the rest of the morning." Viana let out a breathless, thrilled laugh, her hands coming up to rest against Soleil's sharp lapels, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She was completely, deeply in love with this terrifying, brilliant woman and the fact that she could break through that icy composure with 3 simple words was the greatest power she had ever held. "Is that a corporate threat, Miss Makiras?" Viana whispered back, tilting her chin up to capture Soleil's lips. Soleil's response was an explosive, deep, possessive kiss that wiped every trace of sarcasm right out of Viana's mind, leaving them wrapped around each other in the morning sun, completely unstoppable, together and in love. Epilogue: High latency, higher altitude. 6 months later, the terrace of a private villa high in the hills of Sintra, Spain, was bathed in the warm, golden hue of the Mediterranean dusk. Below, the pine-covered slopes cascaded down toward the Atlantic Ocean, where distant waves crashed against the jagged cliffside. The air smelled of coastal salt, wild jasmine, and warm pine needles. On the terrace, a massive mahogany table was strewn with double-shot espressos, a high-end neural diagnostic rig, and 2 ultra-thin, carbon fiber VR visors resting side by side on custom charging docks. Viana sat cross-legged on a plush outdoor lounge chair, wearing an oversized linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her dark hair tied back in a loose, effortless knot. She held a sleek stylus in one hand, making rapid, precise adjustments to a custom spatial mapping algorithm on her tablet. From inside the villa, the quiet footsteps against polished terracotta tile signaled her arrival. Soleil walked out onto the terrace. She had long since traded her crisp corporate suits for a flowing ivory silk dress that caught the ocean breeze. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders in soft waves, and her expression, once famous across North American boardrooms for its impenetrable, icy distance, was open, serene, and soft with an unmistakable, quiet happiness. Soleil walked up behind Viana's chair, setting down a small porcelain plate of fresh pastillas de nata before leaning down to wrap her arms gently around Viana's shoulders. She pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the side of Viana's neck, right over her pulse point. "You're supposed to be on vacation, operative," Soleil murmured into her skin, her low, velvet voice vibrating delightfully against Viana's neck. "No refactoring neural code after 6 p.m. It's in our personal bylaws." Viana let out a breathless, happy laugh, leaning her head back into Soleil's chest and looking up at her CEO, her partner, her sniper, her world. "I'm not work coding," Viana corrected, a wicked, familiar smirk playing on her lips. "I'm optimizing our squad loadouts for the Season 5 exhibition match tonight. Unless Miss Makiras wants to drop into Sector 14 with a 0.5 millisecond input lag on her bolt rifle." Soleil's gray eyes flared with that smoldering, dangerous heat that still set Viana's blood on fire every single time. Soleil's long fingers reached down, gently catching Viana's chin, tipping her face up. "What did I say about calling me that when we're off the clock?" Soleil whispered, her thumb tracing the soft contour of Viana's lower lip with possessive warmth. "I believe you said you'd discipline me," Viana purred back, her brown eyes dancing with sharp, affectionate banter. "Still waiting on HR to process that complaint, by the way." "HR has signed off on all my methods," Soleil murmured, leaning down to capture Viana's lips in a slow, deep, sun-warmed kiss that dissolved the last remnants of Viana's sarcastic defense. When Soleil pulled back, her hands rested comfortably over Viana's waist, pulling her up out of the lounge chair until they were standing together against the terrace railing, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Back in Toronto, Malivra Software was thriving under its new dual leadership energy. The corporate world still talked in hushed, reverent tones about how the brilliant, unstoppable lead architect had melted the company's untouchable CEO. The global gaming community still obsessed over Ione and Gaia, the undefeated duo sitting at the absolute peak of the Elysium leaderboard. But out here, in the quiet Spanish twilight, away from boardrooms, diagnostic screens, and neural grids, there were no masks, no corporate titles, and no avatars to hide behind. Just two women who had fought through snowstorms, corporate fires, and digital war zones to find each other, completely in sync, utterly unstoppable, and deeply in love. Viana wrapped her arms around Soleil's waist, resting her head against Soleil's shoulder as the first stars began to pierce the twilight sky. "Partner?" Viana asked softly. Soleil smiled, lacing her fingers securely through Viana's, her grip tight, warm, and absolute. "Always, operative."